Hi, everyone, and welcome to week 8. We are going to dive into the topic of co-creation this week. This is really building on, we first introduced the idea of co-creation last week when we talked about design thinking, but I thought it was worth going into another week of exploring this concept because it really is core to the idea of design thinking, and it's clearly becoming a way that a lot of organizations operate now. So we've got a couple of auxiliary readings that are in Moodle. There's an article called the Co-Creation in Government, and then another one called the Co-Creation Connection. There are a couple of other optional readings that are also available in Moodle. So what are we talking about when we talk about co-creation? I hadn't actually heard that term until about 3 years ago when we were working on the university's strategic plan, and I think I mentioned this last week in my lecture. We had some colleagues on campus who had gone through some design thinking training, and I hadn't heard the term, but I think I understood the concept going back probably 20 years ago from a book called the Clue Train Manifesto. This was a book that was written by four men who, it was right around the year 2000. We're about 4, 5, 6 years into the revolution of the World Wide Web. And they wrote this book really to explain how business was changing and would change drastically based on this new technology and these new capabilities. This sort of provocative comment that hyperlinks subvert hierarchy was really at the core of their argument. What this means is that with new technology, network technology, all of the employees within an organization now have the ability to communicate with each other, to bypass those chains of command, the structural hierarchy within an organization. And at the same time, our customers, the people who are external to our organization, customers, clients, users of our services, they also have that ability to communicate with each other, share information about their experiences with our organization. And the external audiences have the same ability to talk to internal audiences. And so that really is, I think, the genesis of this idea that instead of resisting this, instead of trying to hang on to that internal control within an organization, what if we take advantage of it? What if we use that as a strategic lever to learn faster, move faster, be more innovative? And so this is really, I think, the why we're seeing this sort of worldwide conversation about approaching strategy and approaching innovation within organizations in a different way. So what's the definition of co-creation? Here's one. It's the collaborative development of new value defined as new concepts, solutions, products, or services. And doing that together with experts, stakeholders, people external to our organization, people at all levels within our organization, other stakeholders in the public sector could include, boards of directors, political appointees, legislative bodies. It could include a lot of different levels of stakeholders. It is about shifting from process-centric thinking to people-centric thinking. So we got into that a little bit last week when we started talking about design thinking and really beginning the process with empathy, deeply understanding the needs of the people that we serve. It also, it's a little bit of a shift from, how do we go about creating value through more efficiency within our organization, to how do we create value through enhancing the client or the customer's experience with our services. And then the other big shift that we talked about a little bit, I saw a lot of conversation about this in our discussion boards last week, is this challenge of shifting from top-down decision-making within our organizations to broadly engaging. And I did see that a lot of you commented that you either worked in organizations or had experience with organizations that were struggling with that idea, or who worked for organizational leaders who sort of didn't get that idea. So why do we do co-creation? Why is this an important thing to think about? One of the real advantages is about building relationships, building more connection, more trust, better communication, again, both internally and between our organization and the people that we serve. Quick story here, a few years ago, our IT organization here at the university decided that we wanted to do an open space conference or an unconference where we would invite people to come together and talk about how we could improve IT. I sort of came into this process a little bit late. The person who was chairing this committee that was putting this on decided to step down. I stepped in, but I had not been part of the planning process. And so I quickly learned that this group that was planning this had decided that they only wanted to invite IT people to this conference. And I sort of questioned them, why would you only do that? And I said, well, we don't trust, there's not enough trust for us to have conversations with people that aren't IT people. And I didn't agree with that, but I didn't want to try to argue with it. So my tactic was to let it go at that point. And then a little bit later on down the road, when we started sort of assigning tasks, I took on the task. I would be the one who would market the conference. I would be the one that would send out the invitations to the people who would attend. And I invited all kinds of people. I invited IT people, but I also invited department heads. I invited frontline people. I invited just a whole variety of folks who are end users of our IT services, who are people who are trying to implement IT services within functional units of the organization. And I sort of expected some blowback, but I didn't get that at all. And in fact, it was one of the best things we could have done because during this day-long conference, there were all of these folks who had sort of known each other by name but didn't really know who each other was. Like, oh, you're the person who I call for help. You're the person who's been working on this project. You're the reason I've been doing this in IT. And so by far the most, the greatest value that came out of this conference really was this relationship building, these breaking down of some of the silos and building of this trust. And so and we continued that with some continuing working groups that came out of that conference. So definitely it's for nothing else, it is worth thinking about in terms of this part of the organization, your relationships. It also there's a great opportunity to increase stakeholder satisfaction. So that is both the customers that you serve and your internal the folks. When people are involved in the process of making something better, it's more meaningful to them. When your employees within an organization can really see that the work they're doing ties in directly with sort of the mission and the purpose of the organization, I mean, that's a good thing as well. It has the potential to reduce costs also. You are actually potentially being much more efficient about your strategy and your innovation and re-engineering processes and those sorts of things, because you're not internally designing them and going out and testing them and then coming back and designing them again. You're actually involving the folks who are using them in the process. You're learning faster, you're iterating faster, prototyping and experimenting faster. So that's another reason why you might think about this concept of co-creation. So what are some of the obstacles? Why aren't we embracing this more rapidly in organizations, especially in the public sector? I saw this a lot in the conversation last week, that there are, for the most part, leaders who are either unwilling to adopt this sort of mindset and this new way of going about it, or they simply don't understand that this is something that you can do, that is a possibility. But I think in large part it's hard for a lot of leaders to get their mind around what this means and to give up sort of that traditional way that we have made decisions within organizations, how we've created strategy from top down and then tried to promote that out. There's talk about this as well, rigidity in government, both in sort of um, the compliance culture that often exists within government organizations, the politics that exist within organizations. So definitely a hindrance in a lot of cases. Interestingly, though, I think if you read these articles, that you'll see that this co-creation concept and design thinking concept actually is a potential solution to overcoming some of this rigidity. The politics I mentioned. And then I think the other thing that keeps people from sort of adopting it is this idea that, yes, you could do this at a small scale. You could do this within a department or within a group that has 8 or 10 people. But how could you possibly scale this to a very large, complex organization, a big government bureau, for example? Or how could you scale this to an entire city, for example? And the reality is you can do this. One of the optional pieces that I have in Moodle this week is a report from Calgary, Alberta, and how they have used this concept of co-creation, of deeply engaging citizens on all kinds of civic innovation projects. And so it's really interesting to see some of the various ways that they've gone about doing that. And again, it comes down to sort of both process, and it also comes down to having a platform that allows you to scale that up. So I want to talk about that a little bit. What are these platforms? Well, how do we go about actually engaging in this co-creation process? So I'll talk a little bit about some face-to-face platforms, and then also online is really critical because that's sort of what spurred all of this to begin with, this capability. So I talked a fair amount last week about our experience doing some design thinking process in the university's strategic planning. So some of the things we did is we went out to a lot of existing events, welcome feast at the beginning of the semester, homecoming tailgates at the football game. We were downtown for one full day. We had a little parklet and a parking space outside the Wilma, where we would just grab people as they walked by, and we'd ask for their input. We had some cards where we got information from them, and then we had this board that we would ask them this just a really simple question of, what do you want from the University of Montana? I mentioned these open space unconferences. I've done several of those as a way to bring people together. You have a framework in terms of a theme that you're going to talk about and sort of the time parameters. But for the most part, you allow the attendees to decide what the topics are, what they want to talk about, what's important, what's on their mind. So people get up and they propose, I would like to have a session talking about this specific strategic challenge that we have in our organization. And then in a very short amount of time, in about 30 minutes, you build a framework of a schedule, and then you go off and you conduct these sessions, and people are free to go to any of the sessions they want. They can move from session to session within the same time frame, and it's really an interesting way, again, not only to build relationships, but to talk about the things that really are on the mind of the people who work at various levels within your organization. And then again, it's also really helpful to bring in external people to this process as well. Another platform that I think you'll read about a little bit, that organizations are starting to, I think, adopt more and more, is creating space within their organization for innovation. So this photo is from space that's in the University Center here at the University of Montana. It's called the Innovation Factory. It's been in the works for several months now. They are just getting ready to actually open this fall. But the idea of these kind of spaces is you create, really open modular space that sort of, it breaks down those barriers to people coming together and being creative and innovative. And I think one of the criticisms you'll see of these is that simply building the space isn't enough. I mean, you actually do have to have some expertise in how you engage people in in creative processes and innovative processes, how you engage people in this co-creation concept. And so that's part of why I wanted to talk about this a little bit and help throughout this rest of this semester, help you think about some of the skills that you could develop as a facilitator of creative thinking, and then potentially use these sorts of spaces as part of your process. And so then there are online platforms. And so with the university's strategic planning process, we used a tool called Neighborland. And it's a fairly simple tool in terms of people get on, and they if they have an idea for something they want to share, they can share that idea. You can see from this that we had well over 600 people who actually submitted ideas through this process. But the other thing that we also did is whenever we had these events like Welcome Feast, we would data enter all of the feedback that we got from these events into Neighborland, into this online platform. And that way all of that was available for people who were on the online platform, people who were scattered, external to the campus. They could also see those ideas and interact with them. So basically the idea of these platforms is you can propose ideas, people can vote on them. In the Neighborland model, it is you just say, me too, I agree with this idea. You can provide some feedback. You can see that top one there has a little thing in the corner that says progress. So the organization itself can start to communicate to folks that, hey, we've listened to what you have said. These are some of the actions that we're starting to take in meeting this need. So this is a really valuable tool to us to make, again, a very transparent process, to get a lot of people engaged in the process. I mentioned Calgary. Calgary uses a tool from a company called IdeaScale, and so when we learned about this a little bit, and we actually piloted this technology as well for a project I worked on looking at IT strategy. So this is a look at our IT campaign around reimagining IT at the University of Montana. Same concept. People could add their ideas to it. People could vote. In this case, instead of just saying me too, you can vote things up and vote things down. This is an example. I just clicked on that number one priority, the one login, identity, and username. And you can see that there is a fair amount of conversation within that, threaded conversations. And so just a really rich way to provide that networked connection across, whatever space you want to work within. So that's it. That's sort of the concept of co-creation. We'll talk about it a little bit more, continue to build on it as we go forward in this semester. But look forward to our next time when we get a chance to discuss some of this in the discussion forum. So thanks, and have a great week, everyone.